Our parable this morning is one of the most misused and abused stories of the New Testament. And contrary to some televangelists, the parable does not validate a life of wealth and affluence. But it may not hold the same meaning for us today as it did for first century Jews. First of all, you have to understand the amount of money that is involved in our lesson today. A talent is equal to approximately 6,000 denarii. Remember that little coin that I showed you a few weeks ago? That was a denarii. 6,000 of them make up a talent. One denarii is equal to a day's wages for a common laborer. Thus, a single talent would be roughly equivalent to 20 years' income for an average worker. That would, in today's money, be around $500,000 for one. For 5 talents, an astronomical 100 years. In any event, all 3 servants received huge sums with which to work with. Interestingly enough, the word talent has influenced the English language, and it has come to mean a gift, an ability, not necessarily monetarily. The traditional Western interpretation of today's parable is that God has provided each of us with certain talents, something on loan from God. And like the servants, we are provided according to our abilities. So our responsibility is tied to our individual abilities. Western culture sees the first 2 servants as having done right by earning money for their master, while the third is considered a wastrel, burying his single talent in the ground. In effect, the parable becomes a justification of capitalism, and some consider it divine confirmation of our economic system, which is certainly not what Jesus Christ had in mind when he told this parable. Richard Rohrbaugh, a religious studies emeritus at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, believes that we need to look at this parable through the eyes of a first century Jew to better understand its true meaning. According to him, the available economic pie was limited, and it was already fully distributed, so that anyone getting more meant that someone else had to get less. Thus, in Jewish culture of the time, seeking more was considered morally wrong, and honorable individuals simply did not seek to gain more, as it meant someone else would have to get less. The master in our lesson even berates the third servant for failing to invest the money with bankers so that he might have at least gained some interest, a practice which I might add is forbidden in Exodus and Leviticus. Of course, there are always exceptions, and the rich and powerful always seem to find a way, don't they? Even today. In today's story, they sidestep condemnation by having their financial affairs managed by their servant, their slave. For shameful or greedy behavior was condoned in slaves and servants because they had no honor, nor did they have any expectation of honor. And it is exactly what is described by Jesus in today's lesson. So what of the third slave, who is so bitterly rebuked by his master and maligned by virtually all Western interpretations for failing to invest the money he was given? Now remember, we're not talking nickels and dimes. We're talking 20 years of income. And according to most rabbis, the third servant did exactly what was proper. He preserved the master's property and honorably refrained from investing the money in accordance with the Torah. There's nothing wrong with the traditional interpretation, and I've spoke on it a number of times. A parable reflecting upon each of our talents as given to us by God and how we use them in celebrating our faith. Matthew teaches us that faithfulness is demonstrated by following the ministry of Jesus, by ministering to the sick, feeding the hungry, blessing the meek, and serving the least of those. Unfortunately, too many twist this story to benefit their own greed, and this is the era of their beliefs. Too often we make the assumption that first century culture was similar to our own. It wasn't. We read the Bible with 21st century eyes, and we often miss how those in the first century viewed and understood the parables of Jesus. So accept either or both interpretations, but do so to honor God and not to validate a life of wealth and affluence. Amen.